What's good? It's Woog. We've got Robson Conceicao, 19 wins, 2 losses, 1 draw, and 1 no contest in a rematch defending his WBC Super-Featherweight title against O'Shaquie Foster. 22 wins and 3 losses. In their first fight, O'Shaquie Foster, shockingly, to play off of O'Shaquie Foster's nickname, shockingly lost a split decision to Conceicao, and Conceicao won the WBC 130-pound title from O'Shaquie Foster. Now, with a lot of these close, controversial, disputed decisions, sometimes I'll walk away from watching the fight thinking that the guy who deserved to win did not win, but I would still stop short of calling it a robbery. I'll be thinking, well, it really could have gone either way, and some of those were swing rounds, and if you interpreted it this way, then you could conceivably squint your eyes and see this other person who got the win winning. Although I don't agree with the call, I'll still say, but I can't quite call it a robbery. And then there are the fights that I just can't get around how badly a fighter was just robbed. And I'm sorry, I know that Teddy Atlas thought that, it wasn't like the worst decision. If you've stuck around and watched boxing enough, you'll see decisions that were far worse than O'Shaquie Foster versus Conceicao. But I'm sorry, this to me was one of the worst robberies of the year. I was watching that fight and I almost started to kind of half watch the fight because the type of action that was taking place round over round stayed consistent pretty much throughout the entirety of the fight, to where yes, it did kind of devolve into a malaise. It was not an action-packed fight, not a fun fight to watch. In fact, in preparation for this preview, it felt like a chore. It felt more laborious than usual to watch this first fight between these two. And I had watched it twice around the time that it initially happened in July earlier this year. And all 3 times I watched the fight, I came away from it thinking that there is only one right decision in this fight. There is no way that you could conceivably give this one to Conceicao unless you really don't know what you're watching. So the fact that this was a split decision, and I remember when I first watched it, hearing the scorecards and just hearing that one judge went this way and one judge went the other way, I was thinking, wait a second. I just had a feeling that we were gonna get a very bogus call. And I felt so bad for O'Shaquie Foster. And as bad as I felt for Foster after hearing that decision, I felt really happy for Robson Conceicao. This is a guy who's had a very tough schedule. Now, he's had one good opportunity after the next, his first major opportunity after, being a former Olympic gold medalist who is now in his mid-30s and kind of looked like his career might be dying on the vine. He got an opportunity against Oscar Valdez, and that was the fight where they let the fight continue, or rather let it happen, after Oscar Valdez tested positive for PEDs. So Oscar Valdez fights Conceicao. Conceicao really fights a very even fight. Conceicao was winning the vast majority of the rounds in the first half of the fight, and then I think Oscar Valdez kind of got into rhythm, started closing the distance a lot more, and started winning some of the rounds in the second half of the fight. But it was really a coin flip. Anybody's guess who won that fight. By the way, I thought that it was totally bogus that not only could Valdez continue and actually fight that fight after his positive PED test, but he also got to hold onto that WBC 130-pound title. So Valdez got a close, unanimous decision win over Conceicao, but that kind of put Conceicao on the map with a lot of the boxing public. And then Conceicao had a lower level fight, and then he fights Shakur Stevenson. Shakur Stevenson, that's the one that Shakur Stevenson missed weight. So it's Conceicao can't catch a break. On one hand, he's fighting a guy with PEDs. On the other hand, he gets, paid off to go along with the fight against Stevenson after Stevenson vacates the title, loses it on the scale. So Stevenson wins that. And then Conceicao has another lower level fight against Nicholas Polanco. It was a no contest in the second round after Polanco couldn't continue after an accidental clash of heads. And then Conceicao fights Emmanuel Navarrete. Yeah, one of the most unusual styles in all of boxing. And Emmanuel Navarrete had been on such a hot streak, dating back to when he was beating Isaac Dogboe, when Navarrete first made a big name for himself. Navarrete had won belts in multiple divisions. He had been a 122 champ, 126 champ. Then he became a 130-pound champ. And then he fights Conceicao, who actually fought Navarrete to a majority draw. So that was one of the decisions that kind of that didn't go against Conceicao in these close fights that he'd been having. He is the guy who basically stops Emmanuel Navarrete's winning streak. No, it wasn't a loss for Navarrete. He would later lose when he went up to fight Dennis Berinchyk at 135. But yeah, that Navarrete versus Conceicao fight, I think it set a record for either the amount of punches thrown or punches landed. It was a rock'em sock'em, ebb and flow, back and forth fight where Conceicao basically gave as good as he got. So yeah, Conceicao really showed out in that one, and Navarrete's superpowers that usually work for him, his freakishly, long reach, less so as he was working up and moving up division by division. He was like a freak of nature at 122 and 126, less so at 130 and 135. But his tons of punches, his volume from the different angles, having his feet all tangled up and still being able to get a lot of leverage into these power shots where it's just this torrential downpour that never ceases. It never stops throughout the 12 rounds of activity. This fight was no different, but again, Conceicao gave as good as he got in this one. So I thought, okay, maybe Conceicao starts to taper off after this, and maybe he's seen his best days. He takes on another lower level fight, an 8-rounder. He wins via 7th round TKO, and then he fights O'Shaquie Foster. So Conceicao's schedule has been like elite fighter, lesser fighter, elite fighter, lesser fighter. It's been a lot of that, and for the most part, he's really fought well in these high profile fights. So then he gets a title shot against O'Shaquie Foster for Foster's WBC 130-pound title. And this, more so than the Oscar Valdez fight, the Navarrete fight, I thought that this was the most convincing loss that Conceicao deserved on his record. I thought that this was a clear loss. Also, if you look at O'Shaquie Foster, after winning the title against Ray Vargas, right before that he fought Yakubov, who's a fighter that you might not have heard of, but you need to know. Yakubov only has one loss. It's against O'Shaquie Foster, and Yakubov has since won 3 more fights. I hope he reemerges and gets another big opportunity, but O'Shaquie Foster beats Yakubov. He beats Ray Vargas for the vacant 130-pound WBC title. Very good win for O'Shaquie Foster. That pretty much put Foster on the map to the larger boxing public. So he becomes a WBC 130-pound champ. Then he fights Rocky Hernandez, and this is a fight where Hernandez continues to apply the pressure as O'Shaquie Foster tries to box from distance, tries to move around the ring, use the whole perimeter of the ring to try to outbox Rocky Hernandez. And this fight, by the way, was taking place in Cancun, Mexico. So the Mexican fighter in this case gets the fight in his home country, even though he's the challenger to O'Shaquie Foster's WBC belt. O'Shaquie Foster's from Texas. So this was like a road game for O'Shaquie Foster. Again, he gets pressured. He's losing on the scorecards, all 3 scorecards heading into the 12th round. And O'Shaquie Foster has a great 11th round. He continues that change in momentum, and he eventually stops Rocky Hernandez dramatically in the 12th and final round. And again, a fight that he was losing on the scorecards. He was about to lose his title right there. So he wins that fight. Then he fights Abraham Nova, who really can't catch a break on these scorecards. I thought Abraham Nova won his last fight, but was given a close decision loss. But with O'Shaquie Foster versus Abraham Nova, I thought that fight was extremely close. Like, I'm watching this round over round, like thinking O'Shaquie Foster really hasn't separated himself on the scorecards. I thought that it was anyone's guess going into that decision who won the fight, and O'Shaquie Foster won a split decision over Abraham Nova. But again, this was really a tough fight to score. And then we got the O'Shaquie Foster versus Conceicao fight. So in the same way that I thought that this was a clear loss for Conceicao, a clearer loss than the one against Oscar Valdez, for instance, I thought that this was O'Shaquie Foster's easiest fight out of his last 3. I thought that the Rocky Hernandez fight was much tougher. I thought that the Abraham Nova fight was a lot tougher. I'm thinking, damn, finally O'Shaquie Foster isn't in a all-out war, and he could kind of cruise to a sweet science boxing at a distance decision win over Conceicao. Again, no, it wasn't a fun fight to watch, but I thought that it was a clear win. And I'm just thinking, O'Shaquie Foster, given what his last 2 fights were after winning the title against Ray Vargas, where again, Rocky Hernandez, that fight was a war that required a 12th round stoppage for Foster to retain the title. and then against Abraham Nova, where again, it was a war, anybody's guess who won. I thought that this was the clearest victory for O'Shaquie Foster, or at least the easiest. Obviously, if he stopped Rocky Hernandez in the 12th, that is what it is. But I thought that this was the fight that was mostly controlled by O'Shaquie Foster. And this is the one that he loses via split decision. So yeah, that was bogus. They're running it back. And there are a couple schools of thought when it comes to this rematch. Should O'Shaquie Foster, given that terrible decision loss in the first fight, should he change up his style to be more engaging, to make this a little bit more action-packed of a fight where you're involved in more, exchanges, where you're just kind of letting the bullets fly, and you're having this fight more closely reflect the type of fight that you had with Abraham Nova, or even the fight that you had with Rocky Hernandez? I'm thinking, no, do what you did last time. Maybe you could put your, maybe you could sit on some more of your punches a little bit more often, but I find it very hard to believe that if O'Shaquie Foster fights the exact same fight, that you get as bad a robbery as you did in that first fight. So no, I don't think that you should just turn into a gunslinger to try to please the judges. And because you're so jaded and so spooked by that terrible decision that took place in the last fight, to where you start changing your style up to try to accommodate bad judging, don't do that. Stick with your guns, outbox him in the way that you did in the first fight. Because, Conceicao started looking like, I don't know, like Regis Prograis does when he can't close the distance, like Prograis did against Devin Haney, or like Prograis did late in the fight recently against Jack Catterall, where it looks like his legs aren't youthful enough to continuously close the distance and to force exchanges. Conceicao wasn't able to force enough exchanges with O'Shaquie Foster. Even though he was given the win, he wasn't able to close that distance and to force those exchanges. So I really think O'Shaquie Foster should do more of the same. And I think that he will recapture that WBC belt. Now, how do I think it's going to go down? I think it's going to be a little bit more action-packed of a fight. I just don't know how you could come away from that first fight, even if you were doing almost everything right. I mean, of course, everybody could do better. And no, it wasn't a perfect fight for O'Shaquie Foster. And yes, he could have done more to even further separate himself round over round, because some of those rounds, there wasn't a lot to score. And so when there's not a lot to score, you're thinking, okay, well, O'Shaquie Foster was at least landing more jabs and was kind of controlling that aspect of the fight. But by and large, he boxed his way to what should have been a victory. I think that he's going to allow a few more exchanges to take place. I think that this is going to be more of a, instead of what I thought was like a 9 rounds to 3 type of fight, type of win for O'Shaquie Foster, maybe 8-4, but it looked more like 9-3 to me. But I think this is going to be a little bit more, not quite slugfest, but it's going to have a lot more action. It's not going to be the snoozer that the first fight was. And yes, that does give Conceicao a bigger chance of actually winning. I know that he won the first, but actually, to our eyes, the viewers' eyes, this will give Conceicao more opportunity to let his fast, pretty hard punches go. And it's going to be interesting to see how disciplined O'Shaquie Foster can stay, given the unfortunate decision in the first fight. But I think he's going to still do enough to clearly outbox Conceicao from distance. Again, I think it's going to have more exchanges than the first fight, but I'm expecting O'Shaquie Foster to win what's going to look like a 8 rounds to 4 type of win. But who knows how the judging plays out. But again, I don't think we're going to get terrible judging 2 fights in a row between these two. So I'm taking O'Shaquie Foster to reclaim the WBC 130-pound title. And it's anybody's guess what happens after that, right? He's with Top Rank. The other champs in the division are Emmanuel Navarrete. Yeah, he still has that WBO 130-pound title. Remember, he lost up at 135, but he still has a WBO belt at 130, and he's going to be fighting a rematch with Oscar Valdez, which I mean, it was a mind-blowing performance in their first fight for Emmanuel Navarrete, but I don't think that they should run it back. I know Oscar Valdez just beat Liam Wilson, who dropped Navarrete before Navarrete stopped Wilson, but that's not the fight that needs to happen. Like, again, I'd much rather see some unification at 130, but Navarrete's got one of the belts. He's going to be fighting Valdez. Lamont Roach is the WBA champ. He's going to be instead going up to fight Gervonta Davis. Remember, Lamont Roach Jr. beat Hector Garcia, and like Hector Garcia went up to fight Gervonta Davis when he was a WBA champ, Lamont Roach, the current 130-pound WBA champ, is going to be going up to fight Tank Davis. I don't like those matchups where you got the 130 guy going up to 135 to fight Tank Davis. Come on. And then you've got Anthony Cacace, who first beat and stopped Joe Cordina to win the IBF belt, and then just fought a non-title fight against Josh Warrington as a part of Riyadh's season, and Cacace won a clear decision by a few rounds over Josh Warrington. So he's the IBF champ, Cacace is. And then again, you've got Robson Conceicao, the WBC champ, who's going to be fighting O'Shaquie Foster in this rematch. So yeah, let me know your thoughts about how this fight is going to take place. You've also got Eduardo Nunez, who's a pretty dang good fighter. Keep your eye out for him. But let me know who you think is going to win, Robson Conceicao versus O'Shaquie Foster 2 in the comments. Do you think that this fight is going to take on the same tone as the first fight? And do you think O'Shaquie Foster is going to try to change things up because of how badly, in my opinion, he was robbed in that first fight? Let me know your thoughts there, and let me know your thoughts on the state of the 130-pound division and how you can see it moving forward. I kind of hope O'Shaquie Foster has the opportunity to fight the winner, assuming Foster beats Conceicao, which isn't a given, but if Foster beats Conceicao, I hope he gets to fight the winner of Emmanuel Navarrete and Oscar Valdez. But let me know your thoughts in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.